to the channel. In this video I'm going to talk about speed and speed limits. Pretty contentious issue, bear with me. And the other thing I'd ask you to bear with me is if you're one of my new subscribers that have come through the motorbike content, please stick with this video. I don't think it's just a car related video, this. It absolutely relates to motorcyclists just as much as it relates to car drivers. So let's start by saying that at this very moment in time, I am breaking the law. I'm breaking the speed limit. This is the Grain Road at Haslingden. It's a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit on the Grain Road. And I've currently got my cruise control set to 53 miles an hour. So as you can imagine, I'm an absolute liability at this speed. This is really dangerous. I'm putting loads of people at risk. It's unnecessary, antisocial. I should be locked up and disqualified from driving. Shouldn't I? Well, actually, in reality, although I've got the cruise control set to 53 on this speedo, I know full well, I've checked this speedo with GPS, against GPS on my phone, and it overreads by about 2 or 3, probably 3 miles an hour at 50 miles an hour. So if I've got my speedo set at 53 miles an hour, then actually, if we're going really accurate, I'm only doing 50 miles an hour. And that's okay, isn't it? Because it's a 50 mile an hour speed limit. But my speedo only reads in 1 mile an hour increments. So how do I not know I'm doing 50.5 miles an hour? Or, you know, because anything above that 50 mile an hour limit, 50.00 is the limit. Anything above that is an offence. And I'm breaking the speed limit. But let's come back to that in a bit. Let's start with a bit of a history lesson. Let's look at the sort of the 20th century history of speed limits in this country, shall we? Can you imagine for 1 minute a British government ever getting rid of all the speed limits? Can you imagine a British government ever saying, right, let's abolish all speed limits, people can drive at whatever speed they want to on the roads? I mean, that'd be absolutely ridiculous, wouldn't it? It'd be mental. Well, believe it or not, that's exactly what happened in 1930. In 1930, British government introduced the Road Traffic Act 1930, and they abolished all speed limits. And I don't just mean all speed limits on rural roads and what you might call de-restricted, or what we call now national speed limit roads out in the countryside. I mean all roads. Built up areas, town centres, there was no speed limit. It was left up to the drivers to choose what speed to drive at. Now, on the one hand, I totally agree with that, because if everybody drove according to the conditions and according to the hazards that are present at the time on the road, then there'd be no need for speed limits. I'm in a 30 mile an hour speed limit at the moment. I'm doing just under 30, but sometimes in a 30 limit, 29.5 miles an hour is too fast. We know that. It's a limit, it's the maximum permitted speed. And I'm going to choose a speed that's sensible and appropriate for the conditions and for the amount of people that are about. If I'm passing a school and there's lots of school kids about, you know, if there's people on horseback or cyclists or whatever. Equally, it will be really nice on an open, clear road or on an open, clear motorway, for instance, when it's quiet, to be able to go at whatever speed I want to. They do it in Germany, don't they, on the autobahns? And if you look back through some of my old videos, I'll put a link below. I did a video on the autobahn doing 162 miles an hour in the old M135i. Nobody died, it was perfectly safe. And it was perfectly legal over there in Germany, different laws. But in 1930, in this country, the Road Traffic Act 1930 abolished all speed limits. And actually between 1930 and 1935, which is when the next change came along, fatalities on the road dropped by about 800 a year. I'm not saying that that was directly related to the removal of speed limits, but it makes you think. Actually, fatalities on the road were really high in those days, so 7,500 people a year dying when there was probably only about 1.5 million vehicles on the road. By comparison, these days it's about 1,700 people a year who die on British roads, and a hugely increased number of vehicles on the road compared with 1930. But then if we fast forward 5 years to 1935, the Road Traffic Act 1934 was introduced in 1935. All right, it was passed through Parliament and through given royal assent as a 1934 Act of Parliament, but it actually came into force in 1935. So a couple of things changed in 1935. First thing is the driving test was introduced. So up until 1935, if you wanted a driving licence, you went to the post office, you paid a few bob, and you got a driving licence. And I think you had to renew it every year, but you didn't have to pass any kind of test for competence. So the first driving tests were introduced in 1935. The other thing that the Road Traffic Act 1934 introduced was a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in built-up areas. That was it. There weren't 40 and 50 and 60 and variety different speed limits available. So the sign that we recognise today as national speed limit sign in this country, which is a white circle with a black line through it, back in 1935 that sign was introduced to indicate the end of a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit area and the start of a de-restricted area. If you travel to the Isle of Man, that sign, that national speed limit sign, still means de-restricted. In the Isle of Man, they've stuck with this principle that you can go at whatever speed you want outside of those built-up areas or outside of those posted speed limit areas. Fast forward now to the end of the 1960s. It was about 1967, 1968, legislation was introduced that brought in the national speed limit. Now, interestingly, they stuck with this white circle with a black line through it. And that's because the national speed limit changes. It can change. It's changed during the fuel crisis in the 1970s. It was reduced to 50 miles an hour. So instead of having to replace all the 60-mile-an-hour limit speed limit signs and replace them with a 50, all they do is introduce temporary legislation to change the national speed limit, and that sign then means that the national speed limit applies, and then there's a list of different national speed limits. As we know, the national speed limit varies in this country. On a single carriageway road, the national speed limit is 60 miles an hour for cars and motorbikes. On a dual carriageway for cars and motorbikes, it's 70, and on a motorway, it's 70 as well. And it means different things for different weights and classes of vehicles as well. So different speed limits there on the weights and classes of vehicles. Now, if there's one comment or question that I get on my videos more than anything else, it relates to speed. It relates to the speed that I'm driving at. And it's usually somebody who's just randomly found one of my videos, and maybe they've stumbled across one of the Scottish overtake videos, or one of the videos where I'm driving a bit more progressively on national speed limit roads, and they take massive umbrage and massive offence at the fact that in their view I am A, breaking the speed limit, and B, putting everybody else on the road in danger by doing that. And that's because on the whole people equate speed with a risk of having an accident. And I think the reason for that more than anything is that has been the message from the police, from central government, from local government over years and years and years, is that speed kills. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here, and I'm going to challenge that. But before I do, I want you to just bear a couple of things in mind. I am not what I would class as a road safety campaigner. I enjoy motoring, I love motoring. If you read my books or you watch the other videos on YouTube or look at the website, you'll know that this is a huge part of my life. It's not my full-time job anymore. I used to be in the police years ago. I was a traffic officer and I worked at the police driving school. I have a really good understanding of what causes accidents, and also I lost my sister in a road traffic accident. I'm going back to 1994, so 26 years ago now, but that's still pretty raw as well, and that was down to some bad driving and some some excessive speed and aggressive driving and drink driving on the part of the other drivers that caused that accident. So I've got a very personal interest in road safety related issues, keeping people safe, reducing the possibility that another family could go through what my family went through, which was absolutely horrendous. I'm not an anti-speed campaigner by any stretch of the imagination, and I do not believe this very simple mantra that speed kills. If speed killed, me and Andy would have died doing 162 miles an hour on the Nürburgring the other year when we went down there. We didn't. So without being too facetious about it, it's not speed that kills, it's stopping really quickly against a tree or a van. That's what kills you. To expand on that, it's the poor application of speed. It's the poor use of speed. It's the poor choices that people make. The inappropriate use of speed on the wrong roads at the wrong time. But surely there's something in it. Surely there's an element. You know, I mean, if you look at how much speed is enforced in this country and how many speed cameras there are, and how much speed enforcement is carried out by police forces up and down the country, and safety camera partnerships and all this kind of stuff, there's got to be something in it. And there is. I am not dismissing the need for people to watch the speed, especially not in built-up areas like this. But that is around reducing the seriousness of accidents when they happen, rather than the accidents actually being caused by the speed itself. Now, when police officers report an injury road traffic accident, they fill in an accident book, an accident report. And this is any accident where an injury has occurred to a person. And in relation to those reports, there are a number of statistics that go through to the Department of Transport. So the DFT collect those statistics, and every year they publish the statistics around accidents, and they will tell you all sorts of stuff. What kind of roads do accidents happen on? Which are the most dangerous roads? Who are the most vulnerable road users? You know, I think there's a statistic that motorcyclists per mile travel are 20 times more likely to die on the roads, for instance, than a car driver. Those kind of statistics. But in amongst there are the contributory factors. And this is the stuff that I find really interesting. I find it so interesting, I wrote a book about it. And if you're interested in that book, I'll put a link in the description below. It's on Amazon. It's called How Not to Crash. And that book examines all these different contributory factors. So contributory factors, I think there's a list of about 80 odd contributory factors that the police officer, when he or she is reporting an accident, they can choose from this list of contributory factors. And they don't just choose one, they choose a number of contributory factors. And the contributory factors are the things that lead to an accident happening. So out of those 80 odd contributory factors, one of them is driving at excess speed. Now, to put it into context, there's about 160 odd thousand reportable accidents every year in the UK. That's 160,000 accidents where somebody is either injured or dies. Now, the death rate is quite low, it's about 1,700 people. The rest of those are minor or serious injury accidents. Out of those accidents, how many do you think include a contributory factor of driving at excess speed? So if I was to ask myself that question before I looked into these statistics, I would have said 40 to 45%. I would have thought that almost half of accidents must include an element of somebody driving or riding at an excessive speed. Because, as we know, speed kills. The true answer is 5%. So this is police officers reporting accidents. Consider that 5% of accidents are caused in part by somebody breaking the speed limit. 5%. That leaves 95% of all other accidents not caused in some way by somebody speeding. Now that's quite surprising, isn't it? I think there's some reasons behind it. I think part of the reason is that people lie and that the police don't have the resources to fully investigate every accident that happens. So I remember turning up at quite a few accidents where somebody's, you know, written off 100 yards of hedge, rolled 14 times into a field, stumbled out, covered in cuts and bruises, and they were only doing 30 miles an hour at the time of the accident. We know people lie. I suspect the number is higher than 5%. I suspect it's probably closer to 10%, but it's still quite a low number. It's about the same number of accidents that are caused in this country by drink driving. Now, in 2018, there were 85,000 people prosecuted for drink driving in the UK. That's a high number. But at the same time, there were just over 2 million people prosecuted for speeding offences. Drink driving causes about 5% of accidents. Excess speed causes about 5% of accidents. So there's a disparity there, isn't there? And it's because it's much easier to catch people speeding, and it's much easier to reduce people's speed. Now, it sounds like I'm a sort of anti-speed enforcement campaigner here, and I promise you I'm not, because there are really valid reasons why there's a need to enforce speed limits in certain places, and I'll put that caveat in. We've a very varied road network in the UK, so some of the roads that we use, a little bit like this, up on the moors, out in rural areas, not a huge number of hazards about. On the whole, it's a fairly open road. The speed limit on this road is 50. It used to be national. Lancashire County Council are quite risk averse when it comes to setting their speed limits. So it's been reduced, along with a lot of other national speed limit roads in Lancashire, to 50 miles an hour, but it's a 50 limit. But when you get into a more built up area, it's what I like to refer to as a more hazard rich environment. There's a lot more things going on, a lot more junctions, more built up, a lot more people about, pedestrians, cyclists, children. The potential for something to go wrong and for an accident to occur is much higher. And it's much higher predominantly because of all those hazards, not because of the speed that people are travelling at, but because of all those other things that are going on. And if you add high speed into that mix, then you're increasing the possibility that an accident is going to occur. And then comes the rub, and this is the bit that you've got to bear in mind. If that accident occurs at higher speed, there is a much higher chance that somebody's going to be seriously injured or killed, especially if it's a more vulnerable road user, like a pedestrian or a cyclist or somebody on horseback or somebody like that. So the whole purpose of speed enforcement really is to reduce the overall speed of the flow of traffic through areas where there is a risk of an accident occurring. That's the whole purpose of it really. And that's why we shouldn't complain too much about speed enforcement in these areas. I'm coming into Burnley now, coming into a much more built up area. We've come into a 30 limit. You can see that there's a lot more going on. There's cars parked up, a lot of cars parked up in the distance. We've got a traffic light junction, vehicles coming up behind, always a possibility that somebody might come through this junction. Always aware of that possibility, and always thinking that there might be somebody stepping out in between any of these vehicles here. Now, if I'm doing 45 miles an hour and somebody steps out and I hit the brakes, I might reduce my speed by 15 miles an hour, but I'm still going to hit that individual at 30 miles an hour. But if I'm doing 30 like this, there's a good chance I'm going to stop before I hit them. Or if I do hit them, I'm going to be doing a much reduced speed, 10, 15 miles an hour. And at that speed, the individual that I hit is far more likely to survive the accident. So that's why I'll always do my utmost to stick to posted speed limits. Any speed limit with a red ring around it, a circular sign with a red ring around it, 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes 60. Those speed limits have been set because of the environment in which that road sits, because of how built up the area is, because of how many risks there are in that area, because of how many hazards there are. So if excess speed, for instance, is only causing 5% of the accidents, what is causing most of the accidents? Well, actually, if you look through those contributory factors, and again, I'll put the link below so you can have a look yourself. If you look at those contributory factors, you'll see that the highest percentage at 38% is a driver or a rider not looking properly. People out here aren't looking, they're not paying attention. That's causing 38% of all the accidents on the road, all the injuries and deaths. 38% people not looking properly. But I can't remember ever seeing a not looking properly camera. But it makes you think, surely it's got to be worthwhile doing a little bit more about careless driving and about getting people to be better drivers. That's why I'm a huge fan of the stuff that the IAM and ROSPA do in generally improving the standards of drivers across the board. And if you've taken part in an advanced driving course like that, and if you've passed the test, especially at the end, then you are a significantly safer driver. And you'll know full well that those courses concentrate on these really important skills: observations, planning, hazard perception, looking for the things that are going to cause you a problem. So all this stuff about speed limits, where does it leave the enthusiastic driver or rider? Where does it leave us, those of us that enjoy driving? Well, the first thing I'd say is You don't necessarily have to break the speed limit to enjoy driving or riding a motorbike. It is perfectly possible to go out for a drive and a ride, stick within the speed limits and enjoy, you know, you find the right road, something a bit twisty, enjoy the cornering, enjoy accelerating out of corners, enjoy keeping the drive or the ride smooth and controlled. There is an element of enjoyment in that, but I also understand that people like to drive a bit quicker as well. And I'm one of those people. I started off by giving you a history lesson and telling you about how the government at one point in this country's history got rid of speed limits altogether and left it up to the individual to make their own mind up. Now, I like that concept. I don't like it in an area like this. I'm quite happy with 20 and 30 limits in areas like this. There's so many things going on, so many people knocking about, so many risks involved, that I am perfectly happy with those lower speed limits and sticking to them. I think there is a really nice element of discipline involved in spotting those speed limits early, making sure you're absolutely bang on in the 30 limits and the 40 limits and the 50 limits. But what about national speed limit roads? The roads that used to be de-restricted in this country, what's my views on those? Well, when I worked in police driver training, we were quite lucky. I say lucky because this was something I used to enjoy doing. Other people might not consider it lucky, but we had a legal exemption from speed limits. So any vehicle that's been used for police purposes has an exemption from speed limits if the vehicle at that time would be hindered by sticking to the speed limits. That's the sort of technical exemption. What that means is for police driver training purposes, clearly, you know, police officers, other emergency services drivers, there is a need sometimes for them to exceed the speed limit if they're responding to an emergency incident, if they're pursuing a fleeing vehicle. You're stuck to the speed limits, you wouldn't be able to do your job. So the principle of police driver training, again, similar to what I promote, is to stick to those posted speed limits accurately, 30s, 40s and 50s. But in national speed limit areas, police officers were taught to drive and are currently taught to drive at speeds that are much in excess of the national speed limit for that road. So what do I do when it comes to national speed limit roads? Well, it depends on what mood I'm in, I suppose, really. What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? So again, let's not get this wrong. I am not promoting driving at excessive speeds on the road by any stretch of the imagination. That's not what this is about. What I'm saying to you is the choice is yours. The choice is yours based on how hazardous that road is, how many hazards there are, how many dangers there are, and you as well. How good are you? How capable are you? How skilled are you? Any idiot can buy a car. The cheapest car available in this country at the moment, the Dacia Sandero, I think it is, top speed is 98 miles an hour. So potentially, on a national speed limit, single carriage road, you could be doing nearly 40 miles an hour over the speed limit in a Dacia Sandero, the cheapest car you can buy. So anybody on the road can break the speed limits without knowing what they're doing. But if you do something to improve your skill level, if you get some extra training, you learn how to drive a car correctly, where to look, how to keep yourself and everybody else safe. Well, maybe you're giving yourself more options then on those national speed limit roads. I'm going to add that it's very, very rare that I will get anywhere near 3-figure speeds on British roads. I don't think that's where the enjoyment in driving and riding motorcycles is. I think the enjoyment in driving and riding on the road is somewhere between 20 and maybe 80 miles an hour. That's where the car or the bike is accelerating. That's where you're getting up to, you know, the enjoyment is in the acceleration and the cornering and the sensations of driving the car or riding the bike along the road. It's not about those really, really high speeds. On a bike, it's not much fun getting up into triple speeds on a bike. Not very enjoyable. The wind noise and the buffeting is horrendous. In a car, it's relatively easy to get to those speeds, especially if you've got something higher performance. But is it really enjoyable to be doing triple speeds? You know, there's a couple of things you've got to think about when you get to those very, very high speeds. and that is that if you have an accident at those speeds, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be like an aircraft accident. It's going to go on for a long time, and there's a lot of chance, you know, there's a very high chance that you're going to hurt yourself really badly or hurt somebody else. And the other thing is, if you get caught at those speeds, at those triple figure speeds, you're going to lose your licence. Now, you get prosecuted for 100 miles an hour plus on a national speed limit road, goodbye licence. You're not going to be driving or riding for a good long period of time. So is it worth it? Is it worth those excessive speeds to that extent? Let's be clear again. The national speed limit on single carriageways for cars and bikes in this country is 60 miles an hour. I'm not suggesting you should go over that. If you choose to, my suggestion, if it's your choice, is that you keep yourself this side of about 80-85 miles an hour. That will allow you to get the occasional overtake in and then bring your speed back down again. It will allow you to enjoy your car or your bike on a nice, open, clear national speed limit road. If you get caught, you'll likely get points on your licence and a fine rather than a ban. If you have an accident, don't get me wrong, there's a good chance you're still going to get seriously hurt on a bike at those speeds. But it's not going to be the colossal aircraft type accident that it would be if you were doing 100 mile an hour plus. If you disagree with me, I'm perfectly happy for you to disagree with me, but take into account all those other things that I'm talking about. Take into account the fact that speed isn't the killer. It's inappropriate use of speed at the wrong point on the wrong road in the wrong circumstances. People pulling out to mini roundabouts. You know, people just generally driving badly is the main cause of accidents on the road, not necessarily excess speed. But if you have an accident, if you combine that bad driving with the excess speed, there's a much higher chance that you'll have an accident. And if the speed is high, there's a much higher chance it's going to be a really bad accident. Somebody's going to get hurt or worse. So we've all got this opportunity still to make these decisions. Now, where you're in a posted speed limit area, stick with it. Stick with that, that's my view. You always drive within those posted speed limits. You're really significantly reducing your chance of ever getting booked for speeding. But at the same time, recognise that those areas are rich in hazards. There's lots of things going on. So don't just think, for instance, that if you stick to those speed limits, you're safe, because you're not. You need to improve your observation skills and your planning skills. All the stuff that makes you a good driver on the whole. Speed is just a small element of that. But when you come out on roads like this, you're out in the countryside, you've made the effort to come out, maybe there's not much traffic about, if you choose to go above that speed limit, above that national speed limit, apply the same principles. Look in the right places, keep the car balanced and smooth, don't be rough with it. Make driving plans based on long forward observations. Look in the far distance, work out what could happen. Try and guess what the vehicles in front are going to do. Try and work out what their plans are. Don't involve somebody else in your mistakes or your cock-ups. Take responsibility for your own actions. Above everything else, don't go outside your own skill level. This is where people get it badly wrong when they start driving at excess and high speeds on national speed limit roads. They go outside their own skill level. If it feels uncomfortable, you're going too fast. And if you get caught, take it on the chin. Nothing you can do about it. You've made the choice. So if you get caught speeding, if you get pulled over by a police officer, which won't happen very often these days, there's hardly any of them left. But if you get blobbed on a camera, take it on the chin. Don't whinge about it, because you've made the choice, you've made that decision to go above that speed limit. Just make sure that when you do go above that speed limit, that's what it is. It's a choice, it's a decision. And in making that choice, you take into account all the hazards that are out there. Look after everybody else out there. You've got to remember that the roads in this country are not there for your pleasure and your enjoyment. They're a method of transport. For most people out there, they're not interested in whether you're out to enjoy yourself or not. So don't involve other people in this. Don't get too aggressive. If there is an opportunity to overtake, do it with a bit of style and grace and smooth. Don't frighten people to death. Take responsibility for your own actions. And don't think solely that to enjoy driving or riding you have to be going fast. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Go and have a look at the website, reglocal.com. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about today is contained within my 2 books. So the first book was Advanced and Performance Driving. The second book is How Not to Crash. Those are both available on Amazon. Again, I'll put the link below. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.